In the shadowy world of elite military operations, there exists an unspoken language understood only by those who have earned the right to speak it. It's a language written in sweat, blood, and unwavering determination. For decades, certain gestures, phrases, and traditions have been jealously guarded by the most elite warriors on Earth. But what happens when that sacred boundary is crossed by someone who was never supposed to understand? What happens when respect is demanded not through rank or title, but through pure, undeniable proof of worthiness? This is the story of a moment that changed everything, when a four-star general's assumptions about who deserved honor collided with a truth so powerful it stopped him dead in his tracks. Sometimes, the most profound lessons come from the most unexpected teachers. Sometimes, those we underestimate hold the greatest power to humble us. The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine grounds of the Naval Special Warfare Command as Commander Sarah Mitchell walked toward what would become the most defining moment of her military career. At 34, she had already shattered more glass ceilings than most people encounter in a lifetime, but today would test everything she had worked for in ways she never imagined. Sarah's footsteps echoed against the polished concrete as she made her way through the corridors lined with photographs of fallen heroes. Each face told a story of sacrifice, courage, and brotherhood that few could truly comprehend. She had studied these walls countless times, knowing that her own journey into this sacred space had been anything but conventional. The daughter of a small-town mechanic from Iowa, Sarah had never planned on a military career. Her childhood was filled with grease-stained coveralls, the sound of revving engines, and the satisfaction of fixing things that others deemed broken beyond repair. Her father, Jim Mitchell, had taught her that respect wasn't something you demanded. It was something you earned through competence, integrity, and the willingness to get your hands dirty. Sarah, her father would say while they worked side by side in the garage, people will judge you by what they see on the surface. But real respect comes from what you can do when nobody's watching. Remember that. Those words would prove prophetic as Sarah navigated through college on an ROTC scholarship, distinguishing herself not just academically, but through her natural leadership abilities and an almost supernatural capacity for tactical thinking. Her professors noted her unique ability to see patterns others missed, to find solutions in chaos, and to inspire others to push beyond their perceived limitations. When Sarah graduated summa cum laude with degrees in both mechanical engineering and strategic studies, the Navy took notice. Her initial assignment to naval intelligence seemed like a natural fit for someone with her analytical mind and technical background. But Sarah had always felt drawn to something more hands-on, more directly connected to the warriors she supported from behind the scenes. It was during her second deployment, while providing intelligence support to SEAL operations in Afghanistan, that Sarah first encountered the elite brotherhood that would come to define her purpose. She watched these warriors prepare for missions that most people couldn't imagine, witnessed their dedication to each other and their craft, and felt something stirring within her that she had never experienced before. The SEALs she supported began to notice her too. Unlike other intelligence officers who simply handed over briefing packets and wished them luck, Sarah immersed herself in understanding every aspect of their operations. She learned their terminology, studied their tactics, and, most importantly, she earned their trust by consistently providing intelligence that kept them alive. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Rodriguez was the first to really take notice of the young intelligence officer who seemed to understand their world better than most outsiders. A 15-year veteran with multiple combat deployments, Marcus had seen countless support personnel come and go. Most were competent enough, but few truly grasped the life and death nature of special operations. "You're different," Marcus told Sarah one evening as they reviewed mission parameters for an upcoming operation. "You get it. You understand what we're risking out there." Sarah looked up from the satellite imagery spread across the table between them. "My job is to make sure you all come home. I can't do that if I don't understand what you're facing." That conversation marked the beginning of an unusual mentorship. Marcus began including Sarah in training discussions, explaining the nuances of small unit tactics and helping her understand the psychology of special operations. Other team members started accepting her presence, sharing insights they rarely offered to outsiders. But it was during a mission that went sideways that Sarah truly proved herself. When communications were compromised and the SEAL team found themselves isolated with wounded members, Sarah broke protocol. She left the safety of the operations center, commandeered a vehicle, and drove through hostile territory to establish an alternative communication relay that ultimately saved 3 lives. "Ma'am, you just pulled off something that most people wouldn't have the guts to attempt," Marcus told her after the successful extraction. "You've got the heart of a warrior. You ever think about taking that next step?" The idea had been growing in Sarah's mind for months, but she had always dismissed it as unrealistic. SEALs were men. That was how it had always been. But as the military began opening more opportunities to women, whispers started circulating about potential changes to special operations. When the announcement came that the Navy would begin allowing qualified women to attempt SEAL training, Sarah felt her world shift. The opportunity was unprecedented, the odds were astronomical, and the scrutiny would be intense. But she also knew this was her calling. The application process was grueling. Physical fitness standards, psychological evaluations, leadership assessments, and interviews that seemed designed to break down every assumption about her motivations and capabilities. But Sarah persevered, driven by the same determination that had gotten her through every other challenge in her life. Her father's voice echoed in her mind during the most difficult moments. "Respect isn't something you demand, it's something you earn." When Sarah received notification that she had been accepted for basic underwater demolition/SEAL training, the news sent shockwaves through the military community. She would be the first woman ever to attempt the legendary program, carrying the hopes and fears of countless others on her shoulders. The weeks leading up to training were filled with preparation that went far beyond the physical. Sarah knew she would face skepticism, resentment, and outright hostility from some quarters. She also knew that failure would not just be personal. It would be used as evidence that women didn't belong in special operations. But as she packed her gear and prepared to leave for Coronado, California, Sarah felt ready. She had spent years earning the respect of warriors, proving herself under fire, and preparing for this moment. She understood the weight of what she was attempting, but she also understood her own capabilities. The night before departure, Marcus called her with some final advice. "Remember, Mitchell, they're going to test everything about you. Your physical strength, your mental toughness, your ability to work as part of a team. But the most important thing they'll test is your heart. Do you really want this badly enough to pay the price?" Sarah thought about all the fallen heroes whose photographs lined the walls of NAVSBCWAR. She thought about her father's teachings about earning respect. She thought about the missions where good intelligence had made the difference between life and death for warriors in harm's way. "I'm ready," she told Marcus. "I understand what I'm signing up for." As her plane lifted off for California, Sarah stared out the window at the patchwork of farmland below, thinking about the journey that had brought her to this point. She was about to enter a world that had never included someone like her, attempt something that many believed was impossible, and fight for acceptance in a brotherhood that defined itself by exclusivity. But Sarah Mitchell had been fighting for acceptance her entire life. She had learned to earn respect through competence, to prove herself through action, and to never back down from a challenge that mattered. Tomorrow, she would begin the most difficult test of her life, knowing that success would change everything and failure would echo through history. The plane banked toward the setting sun, carrying her toward a destiny that would ultimately lead to that fateful morning when a general's assumptions about sacred traditions would collide with a truth too powerful to ignore. But that confrontation was still months away, beyond the crucible of training that would either forge her into something extraordinary or break her completely. For now, Sarah Mitchell was simply a woman with a dream, flying toward the unknown with nothing but her father's wisdom, her own determination, and the respect she had earned from warriors who understood what it meant to put everything on the line for something greater than yourself. The first phase of BUD/S training began before dawn on a Monday morning that would forever change Sarah's understanding of human limitations. As her feet hit the sand of Coronado Beach for the first time as a SEAL candidate, she carried with her not just personal ambition, but the weight of history and the hopes of everyone who had ever been told they weren't enough. The instructors watched her with eyes that seemed to see everything, evaluating not just her physical capabilities, but her character, her resilience, and her commitment to the brotherhood she sought to join. They had broken strong men, humbled accomplished warriors, and sent countless candidates home to rethink their life choices. But as Sarah Mitchell began the journey that would ultimately lead to that moment of truth with a four-star general, she carried something that couldn't be measured in test scores or time standards. She carried the earned respect of warriors, the wisdom of a father who had taught her the true meaning of honor, and the unshakable belief that belonging wasn't about what others expected. It was about what you were willing to prove. The first 3 weeks of BUD/S training stripped away every preconception Sarah had about her own limits. The physical demands were crushing, but the psychological pressure proved even more intense. Every day began before sunrise with hours of calisthenics that left muscles screaming and lungs burning. The ocean became both enemy and teacher, its cold embrace testing resolve while demanding respect. Instructor Chief Petty Officer Dan Harrison had been breaking candidates for 12 years, and he approached Sarah's training with the same merciless standards applied to every other hopeful who entered his domain. A former SEAL with multiple combat deployments, Harrison understood that sentiment and politics had no place in a training program designed to forge warriors capable of operating in the world's most dangerous environments. Mitchell, Harrison barked during the second week of training as Sarah struggled through a beach run that had already claimed 3 dropouts. You think being the first makes you special? Out here, you're just another candidate who might not make it to lunch. Sarah's lungs felt like they were filled with fire, but she managed to respond without breaking stride. No, Chief. I'm just another candidate trying to earn my place. That response caught Harrison's attention. Most candidates either tried to argue their worthiness or simply endured the verbal assault in silence. Sarah's acknowledgement that she had to earn her place, rather than assuming she deserved it, suggested a maturity that many seasoned warriors never achieved. The training intensified as weeks passed. Pool competency tests that simulated drowning scenarios, endless hours of physical training designed to push bodies beyond their breaking points, and academic challenges that required mastering complex technical subjects while operating on minimal sleep and maximum stress. But it was during the infamous Hell Week that Sarah truly began to understand what separated those who belonged from those who dreamed. 5.5 days of continuous training with a total of perhaps 4 hours of sleep, designed to test not just physical endurance, but mental resilience and the ability to function as part of a team when individual strength failed. As Monday night bled into Tuesday morning, candidates began dropping out in alarming numbers. Men who had seemed unbreakable during the first weeks of training found themselves staring into an abyss of exhaustion and pain that revealed truths about their own limitations they had never imagined. Sarah's body screamed for relief as she carried telephone poles with teammates whose names she could barely remember through the fog of sleep deprivation. Her hands were raw and bleeding, her legs felt like liquid, and hallucinations began creeping around the edges of her vision. But something her father had taught her years ago kept echoing through the chaos of her mind. When everything hurts and you can't see a way forward, Jim Mitchell had told her while they worked on a particularly stubborn engine, that's when you find out who you really are. That's when character shows up. Character showed up during a surf passage exercise when candidate Thompson, a former college football player who outweighed Sarah by 70 pounds, began showing signs of hypothermia in the brutal Pacific waters. Without hesitation, Sarah linked arms with him, using her body heat and position to help him maintain stability as their boat crew navigated through crushing waves that seemed determined to separate them from consciousness. "Stay with me, Thompson," Sarah shouted over the roar of the ocean. "We finished this together." Thompson would later tell reporters that Sarah's intervention probably saved his life, but more importantly, it demonstrated something the instructors had been watching for throughout the entire ordeal: the willingness to sacrifice personal comfort for team success, even when personal survival was in question. Chief Harrison observed the exchange from his position on the beach, making mental notes about candidates who revealed their true character under extreme duress. Sarah Mitchell wasn't just surviving Hell Week. She was becoming a leader within her training class, earning respect not through speeches or demands, but through actions that spoke louder than any words. By Thursday, only 40% of the original class remained. Those who continued had moved beyond individual effort into a collective survival mindset that bound them together in ways that civilians could never fully understand. They shared food when regulations allowed, offered encouragement when voices failed, and carried each other through moments when individual strength proved insufficient. Sarah found herself at the center of this brotherhood, not because she sought leadership, but because her teammates recognized something in her that transcended gender or background. She had proven herself capable of giving everything she had for others, even when she had nothing left to give. The final day of Hell Week tested everything they had learned about themselves and each other. A series of challenges that would have seemed impossible the previous Monday now felt manageable. Not because they had become easier, but because the candidates had been transformed by their shared ordeal. When the bell finally rang to signal the end of Hell Week, only 22 candidates remained from the original class of 63. Sarah Mitchell stood among them, exhausted beyond description, but filled with a sense of accomplishment that no previous achievement had ever provided. "Congratulations," Chief Harrison told the surviving candidates as they stood shivering on the beach where their journey had begun 5 days earlier. "You've completed the first real test of whether you belong in this community. But Hell Week is just the beginning. Everything from here forward builds on what you've proven to yourselves and each other this week." As the weeks continued, Sarah's training progressed through increasingly complex phases. Combat diving operations that required mastery of underwater navigation and demolitions, land warfare exercises that tested small unit tactics, and marksmanship under conditions designed to simulate combat stress. And, perhaps most importantly, the gradual development of the mental frameworks that separated special operations personnel from conventional forces. It was during this period that Sarah began to truly understand the culture she was entering. The unspoken codes of conduct that governed relationships within the teams. The traditions that connected current operators to decades of fallen heroes. And the expectations that went far beyond technical competence to encompass character, integrity, and absolute commitment to the mission and teammates. Lieutenant Commander Jake Sullivan, a SEAL team leader who served as one of the primary instructors during the advanced phases of training, took particular interest in Sarah's development. Sullivan had commanded teams in Iraq and Afghanistan, losing men he considered brothers and carrying scars both visible and hidden that spoke to the reality of special operations warfare. "Mitchell," Sullivan said during a break in training, "we're getting the technical aspects faster than most candidates I've seen. But the real question is whether you understand what you're really signing up for. This isn't about proving a point or breaking barriers. This is about being willing to die for the man next to you and knowing he's willing to do the same for you." Sarah considered his words carefully before responding. "Sir, I've been supporting SEAL operations for years. I've seen what this community asks of its members. I'm not here to prove anything to anyone else. I'm here because I know this is where I belong." Sullivan studied her face, looking for any sign of uncertainty or bravado. What he saw instead was the quiet confidence that came from someone who had already faced their fears and made peace with the consequences of their choices. "We'll see," Sullivan said simply. "The training will tell us everything we need to know." As Sarah progressed through the final phases of BUD/S, word of her success began reaching higher levels of the military hierarchy. A woman succeeding in SEAL training was unprecedented, and the implications extended far beyond the Navy's special operations community. Pentagon officials began monitoring her progress with interest that was equal parts supportive and skeptical. Media outlets started asking questions about access and interview opportunities. And within the SEAL community itself, opinions ranged from cautious optimism to outright resistance to the changes her success represented. But Sarah remained focused on the daily requirements of her training, understanding that external pressures and political considerations had no place in the crucible that was shaping her into something she had never imagined possible. Every day brought new challenges that tested not just her individual capabilities, but her integration into the team-focused culture that defines special operations. It was during a particularly complex mission planning exercise that Sarah first encountered some of the resistance she would face within the broader military community. A visiting colonel, observing the training as part of his own professional development, made comments that suggested his belief that women had no place in combat operations. "I don't care how well she performs in training," the colonel said to Sullivan when he thought Sarah couldn't hear. "When the bullets start flying and people start dying, those men are going to be distracted by trying to protect her instead of focusing on the mission." Sarah heard every word, but rather than responding with anger or defensiveness, she filed the comment away as motivation. She understood that changing minds would require more than words. It would require undeniable proof of capability under the most demanding circumstances possible. The final weeks of BUD/S included exercises designed to test everything candidates had learned about themselves and their profession. Complex scenarios that combined all the technical skills they had mastered with the psychological pressures they would face in actual operations. During one exercise that simulated a hostage rescue operation, Sarah found herself in a leadership position when the designated team leader was injured during the approach phase. Without hesitation, she adapted the plan to account for changed circumstances, coordinated the team's assault on the objective, and successfully completed the mission while ensuring the safety of both her teammates and the simulated hostages. Chief Harrison, observing the exercise from concealed position, watched Sarah's performance with growing respect. She hadn't just executed a successful operation. She had demonstrated the kind of adaptive leadership that separated good operators from great ones. When the exercise concluded, Sarah's teammates expressed their confidence in her leadership through actions rather than words. They followed her directions without question, trusted her judgment in critical moments, and treated her as a fully integrated member of their team rather than an outsider trying to prove herself. As graduation from BUD/S approached, Sarah reflected on the transformation she had undergone over the previous months. The woman who had entered training was accomplished and confident, but the person preparing to receive her SEAL qualification had been forged by experiences that few humans ever encounter. She had learned to function effectively on minimal sleep and maximum stress. She had mastered technical skills that required precision under pressure. Most importantly, she had earned her place in a brotherhood that measured worth not by background or demographics, but by willingness to sacrifice everything for the mission and teammates. The graduation ceremony was attended by senior military officials, proud families, and media representatives eager to document this historic moment. But for Sarah, the most meaningful recognition came from her classmates and instructors who had witnessed her journey firsthand. As she received her SEAL qualification from the commanding officer of Naval Special Warfare, Sarah thought about her father's teachings about earning respect through action rather than demanding it through words. She had proven herself worthy not through arguments about equality or fairness, but through demonstrated competence under the most demanding circumstances imaginable. But even as she celebrated this achievement, Sarah understood that earning her SEAL qualification was just the beginning. The real test would come when she joined an operational team and faced the challenges of integrating into units that had never included someone like her. The next phase of her journey would take her to advanced training schools that would further develop her capabilities as a special operations warrior. But more importantly, it would eventually lead to that fateful encounter with a four-star general whose assumptions about sacred traditions would collide with a reality that challenged everything he thought he understood about honor and respect. For now, though, Sarah Mitchell stood among her classmates as a fully qualified Navy SEAL, carrying with her not just personal pride, but the knowledge that she had opened a door for others to follow. The path ahead remained uncertain, but she faced it with the confidence that came from having earned her place through the most demanding trial the military could devise. The brotherhood she had joined was built on foundations stronger than tradition or prejudice. It was built on proven capability, demonstrated character, and the willingness to pay whatever price the mission demanded. Sarah Mitchell had paid that price and earned the right to call herself a SEAL. Sarah's assignment to SEAL Team 7 marked the beginning of a new chapter that would test everything she had learned during training in ways that no simulation could replicate. The team's compound in Virginia Beach buzzed with the kind of controlled intensity that characterized elite military units preparing for operations that existed in the shadows between diplomacy and war. Team 7's commanding officer, Lieutenant Commander Marcus Chun, had built his reputation through 15 years of special operations, including multiple deployments to Iraq, Afghanistan, and other locations that didn't officially exist in Pentagon briefings. Chun approached Sarah's integration into his team with the pragmatic mindset of a leader who measured value through operational effectiveness rather than political considerations. Mitchell, Chun said during their first meeting in his office overlooking the team's training facilities, "You've proven you can get through training. But training and operations are different animals. My job is to bring every member of this team home alive while accomplishing missions that most people can't imagine. I don't care about your background or what statement your presence makes. I care about whether you can do the job when lives are on the line." Sarah appreciated Chen's directness. Throughout her military career, she had encountered leaders who either treated her as a political symbol or approached her with kid gloves out of fear of making mistakes. Chen's straightforward assessment of her role felt refreshing and honest. "Sir, I understand the responsibility that comes with being part of this team. I'm here to contribute to mission success, not to prove political points or break barriers for their own sake." Chun studied her response, noting the absence of defensiveness or grandiose statements about making history. Sarah's focus on mission success rather than personal achievement suggested the kind of professional maturity that effective teams required. The other members of Team 7 approached Sarah's arrival with varying degrees of skepticism, curiosity, and cautious acceptance. Petty Officer First Class David Kim, the team's communications specialist, had served with Chun through 3 deployments and understood the delicate chemistry required for small unit effectiveness. "Look," Kim told Sarah during her first week with the team, "we don't care about your plumbing or your politics. What we care about is whether you can do your job when everything goes sideways and people start shooting at us. Prove that, and you'll fit in fine. Fail, and you'll wash out regardless of what the brass wants." That conversation set the tone for Sarah's integration into Team 7. She would be evaluated based on operational competence rather than symbolic significance, measured against standards that have been refined through years of combat operations where mistakes meant death. The team's training regimen pushed Sarah into operational scenarios that made BUD/S look like preparation rather than the main event. Complex infiltration exercises that required mastering multiple insertion methods. Close quarters battle training in environments designed to replicate every possible combat scenario. And, perhaps most importantly, the development of unit cohesion that would allow 6 individuals to function as a single organism under the most stressful conditions imaginable. It was during a hostage rescue training exercise at the team's advanced facility that Sarah first truly proved herself to her new teammates. The scenario involved multiple hostages held in a compound defended by well-trained role players using simulated weapons and tactics designed to replicate real-world threats. When the initial assault plan was compromised by unexpected enemy movements, Sarah demonstrated the kind of adaptive thinking that separated good operators from great ones. She identified an alternative entry point that had been overlooked in the initial planning, coordinated a flanking maneuver that neutralized 3 enemy positions, and successfully extracted all hostages without any simulated casualties. Petty Officer Kim, serving as overwatch for the operation, watched Sarah's performance through his scope with growing respect. "She just pulled off something that most operators would have struggled with," he reported to Chun after the exercise. "No hesitation, perfect execution, and she made it look easy." But it was Sarah's response to a training accident that truly earned her acceptance within Team 7. During a live-fire exercise, Petty Officer Second Class Miguel Santos suffered a malfunction with his parachute during a halo insertion that left him unconscious and potentially critically injured. Without waiting for orders or considering her own safety, Sarah immediately diverted from the planned landing zone, performed an emergency landing near Santos' position and began providing medical treatment while calling for extraction. Her quick thinking and willingness to abandon the mission to save a teammate demonstrated the kind of loyalty that defined the SEAL Brotherhood. "You risked your own life to help Santos," Chin told Sarah after the incident. "That's not something you can teach in training. Either you have that instinct or you don't." Sarah's response was characteristically direct. Santos would have done the same for any of us. That's what teammates do. That incident marked a turning point in Sarah's relationship with Team 7. Her teammates began including her in the informal gatherings and conversations that really built unit cohesion. They shared stories from previous deployments, discussed tactical innovations they had developed through experience, and, most importantly, began treating her as a fully integrated member of their brotherhood. The team's first operational deployment came sooner than expected when intelligence indicated that an American diplomat had been kidnapped in a region where conventional military forces couldn't operate openly. Team 7 received orders for a classified mission that would test everything they had trained for while operating in an environment where failure would create international incidents. Sarah felt the weight of responsibility as the team prepared for deployment. She would be the first woman SEAL to participate in a real-world special operations mission, carrying expectations and scrutiny that extended far beyond her unit. But she also understood that her teammates were counting on her to perform her role effectively, regardless of external pressures. The mission briefing revealed a complex scenario requiring infiltration into hostile territory, location and rescue of the kidnapped diplomat, and extraction without leaving evidence of American involvement. The operation would test every skill Team 7 had developed while requiring perfect coordination under combat conditions. As the team conducted final mission preparation, Chun gathered them for a conversation that would become legendary within the special operations community. "This mission is going to be challenging for all of us," Chun began. "But I want everyone to understand something. We're not carrying any extra weight on this team. Every person here earned their place and deserves to be here. Mitchell has proven herself just like the rest of us. She's not a female SEAL. She's a SEAL, period." The team's response was immediate and unanimous. They had worked with Sarah long enough to see her capabilities firsthand, and they trusted her competence based on demonstrated performance rather than assumptions about gender or physical capabilities. The infiltration went smoothly, with Team 7 using a combination of maritime and overland approaches to reach the target area without detection. Sarah's role as the team's intelligence specialist proved crucial as she analyzed real-time information to adjust their approach based on changing enemy positions and patrol patterns. When they located the kidnapped diplomat in a compound defended by well-armed guards, Sarah's tactical recommendations proved instrumental in developing an assault plan that minimized risk to both the hostage and the team. Her ability to process complex information quickly and identify vulnerabilities in enemy positions demonstrated the kind of analytical capability that made special operations successful. The rescue operation itself unfolded with the precision that characterized Team 7's training. Sarah breached the building's rear entrance while her teammates created diversions and eliminated guards. She located the diplomat, provided immediate medical assessment, and coordinated his movement to the extraction point while maintaining communication with supporting elements. But it was during the extraction phase that Sarah truly proved herself under fire. When unexpected enemy reinforcements threatened to overwhelm the team's exfiltration route, Sarah volunteered to provide covering fire while her teammates moved the rescued diplomat to safety. For 20 minutes, Sarah held a defensive position against superior numbers while her team organized the evacuation. She used every skill learned during training to maximize the effectiveness of her position, conserve ammunition, and maintain communication with supporting assets. Most importantly, she demonstrated the kind of calm professionalism under extreme stress that defined elite warriors. When the team finally reached the extraction point and boarded their recovery aircraft, Sarah was the last person to leave her position. As she climbed aboard the helicopter, Kim grabbed her shoulder and shouted over the rotor noise, "Outstanding work, Mitchell. That was some of the finest shooting I've ever seen." The mission's success earned Team 7 recognition throughout the special operations community. But for Sarah, the most meaningful recognition came from her teammates who had seen her perform under the ultimate test. She had proven herself not through training exercises or political statements, but through demonstrated competence in actual combat operations. During the debrief, Chun submitted an evaluation that would become part of Sarah's permanent record and influence her future assignments within the special operations community. Petty Officer Mitchell performed exceptionally during all phases of this operation, Chun wrote. Her technical competence, tactical judgment, and personal courage under fire were outstanding. She is a fully qualified special operations warrior who happens to be female, not a female who has been granted special accommodations. I recommend her for advanced training and future leadership responsibilities. That evaluation would prove prophetic as Sarah's reputation began spreading throughout the SEAL community. Other team leaders began requesting her for complex operations that required her unique combination of technical expertise and operational experience. She participated in missions across multiple continents, always performing at the highest levels while continuing to break down barriers through competence rather than activism. But it was her growing reputation that would eventually lead to the encounter that would define her legacy within military. As Sarah's operational record became known throughout the special operations community, she began attracting attention from senior military leaders who wanted to understand how her integration had been achieved so successfully. General Robert Harrison, a four-star Army general with extensive special operations background, had been following Sarah's career with interest. Harrison commanded a joint special operations unit that coordinated activities across all military branches, and he had been tasked with evaluating the lessons learned from integrating women into previously male-only specialties. But Harrison also carried assumptions about military tradition and the sacred nature of certain customs that had been developed exclusively within male-dominated military cultures. He believed that some traditions were too important to change, regardless of evolving social attitudes or political pressures. It was these assumptions that would eventually lead to the confrontation that would challenge everything Harrison thought he understood about honor, respect, and the true meaning of military tradition. Sarah Mitchell had proven herself capable of meeting every challenge the military could devise, but her greatest test would come not from enemy forces or difficult missions, but from confronting prejudices within her own military hierarchy. As Sarah continued building her operational record and earning respect through demonstrated competence, she remained unaware that her success was creating tensions within senior military leadership about the implications of her achievements. Some leaders saw her success as validation of expanding opportunities for women in military service. Others viewed it as a threat to traditions that they believed defined military culture. The stage was being set for a confrontation that would force the military to confront fundamental questions about the nature of honor, tradition, and earned respect. Sarah Mitchell had proven herself worthy of wearing the SEAL trident through every possible measure of competence and courage. But she would soon discover that changing minds required more than just exemplary performance. It required challenging assumptions that some people held as sacred truths. The moment of truth was approaching, when a general's certainty about who deserved respect would collide with evidence too powerful to ignore. Sarah's journey from small-town mechanic's daughter to elite warrior was about to reach its climax in a confrontation that would redefine military tradition and demonstrate the true meaning of earned honor. The Joint Military Conference at the Pentagon brought together the most senior leaders from across all branches of the armed forces, representing decades of experience and perspectives shaped by generations of military tradition. The annual gathering served multiple purposes: strategic planning, resource allocation discussions, and the kind of informal networking that often proved more valuable than official meetings. General Robert Harrison arrived at the conference carrying both the authority of his four-star rank and the weight of assumptions that had been reinforced through 30 years of military service. A decorated combat veteran with multiple deployments and extensive special operations experience, Harrison commanded respect throughout the military community for his tactical expertise and unwavering commitment to military excellence. But Harrison also represented a generation of military leaders who had risen through ranks where certain traditions were considered inviolable, where specific customs were reserved for those who had earned them through pathways that had remained unchanged for decades. In his mind, some boundaries were not meant to be crossed, regardless of changing political winds or social pressures. The conference agenda included presentations on various topics related to military readiness and operational effectiveness. One session focused specifically on the integration of women into previously male-only military specialties, featuring case studies and lessons learned from across different branches and career fields. Sarah Mitchell's success story had become a centerpiece of these discussions. Her completion of SEAL training and subsequent operational performance had generated interest from military leaders, academic researchers, and policymakers who wanted to understand the factors that had contributed to her success where others had failed. Lieutenant Commander Chun had been invited to present Team 7's experience with integrating Sarah into their operational unit. His presentation focused on practical considerations rather than political implications, addressing questions about unit cohesion, training modifications, and the impact on mission effectiveness. The integration process was successful because we focused on operational requirements rather than external pressures, Chun told the assembled officers. Petty Officer Mitchell earned her place through demonstrated competence, and her teammates accepted her because she proved herself capable of meeting our standards under actual combat conditions. General Harrison listened to Chin's presentation with interest, but also with skepticism that reflected his deeper concerns about changing military traditions. He believed that certain customs and practices were too important to military culture to be modified for social or political reasons. During the break between sessions, Harrison approached Chun with questions that revealed his perspective on the broader implications of women in special operations. "Commander, I appreciate your team's operational success," Harrison began, "but I'm concerned about the long-term impact on unit traditions and cohesion. There are certain customs within the special operations community that have developed over decades. These traditions serve important purposes beyond just social bonding." Shin recognized the subtext in Harrison's comments. The general was referring to the informal customs and gestures that had developed within special operations units as ways of recognizing shared experiences and mutual respect. These traditions often included specific handshakes, phrases, or acknowledgments that were considered sacred within the community. "Sir, could you be more specific about your concerns?" Chin asked, genuinely interested in understanding Harrison's perspective. Harrison lowered his voice, speaking in the confidential tone reserved for discussions about sensitive military matters. "There are certain gestures and traditions that have been reserved for operators who earned them through specific pathways. The silent fist bump that SEALs use to acknowledge each other. The specific handshake that Rangers share. These aren't just social customs. They represent shared sacrifices and experiences that outsiders can't truly understand." Chun began to understand Harrison's concern, but he also recognized a fundamental misunderstanding about Sarah's status within the SEAL community. "General, I think there might be some confusion about Petty Officer Mitchell's position within our community. She isn't an outsider who has been granted honorary status. She's a fully qualified SEAL who earned her place through the same training and operational experience as every other member of our teams." But Harrison's response revealed the depth of his assumptions about military tradition and who deserved to participate in sacred customs. "Commander, I understand she completed training, but some traditions are about more than technical qualifications. They're about belonging to a brotherhood that has been built through shared experiences that go back generations." That conversation would prove prophetic when Harrison encountered Sarah later that day during an informal gathering in the Pentagon's senior officer dining facility. The encounter that followed would force both of them to confront fundamental questions about the nature of military tradition and earned respect. Sarah had arrived at the dining facility with Chun and several other SEAL officers who were attending the conference. She carried herself with the quiet confidence that characterized experienced operators, wearing her dress uniform with the same professionalism that marked her approach to every aspect of military service. The SEAL trident on her chest gleamed under the dining room's lights, representing not just personal achievement, but the completion of a journey that attested every aspect of her character and capabilities. To those who understood its significance, the trident told a story of sacrifice, determination, and earned membership in one of the world's most elite military communities. Harrison noticed Sarah's presence immediately, recognizing her from photographs that had accompanied various reports about women in special operations. He observed her interactions with other SEAL officers, noting the easy camaraderie and mutual respect that characterized their conversations. But as Harrison continued watching, he noticed something that challenged his assumptions about military tradition and appropriate customs. When Sarah encountered Chief Petty Officer Marcus Rodriguez, her former mentor from intelligence operations who was now attending the conference as part of an advanced training program, their greeting included the subtle fist bump that had become a signature acknowledgement within the SEAL community. The gesture lasted perhaps 2 seconds, but Harrison saw it clearly. A specific hand position, a brief contact, and a mutual nod that represented recognition between operators who had shared experiences and earned mutual respect through demonstrated competence under fire. In Harrison's mind, that gesture represented something sacred that should be reserved for those who had earned it through traditional pathways. He believed that certain customs were too important to military culture to be modified, regardless of individual achievement or technical qualifications. Without considering the implications or appropriateness of his intervention, Harrison approached Sarah and Rodriguez with the intention of correcting what he perceived as a violation of military tradition. "Excuse me," Harrison said, his 4-star rank immediately commanding attention from everyone within earshot. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding about appropriate customs and traditions." Sarah and Rodriguez both came to attention, recognizing Harrison's rank and responding with appropriate military courtesy. Neither understood the reason for the general's intervention or the accusation implicit in his comment about misunderstandings. "Sir," Sarah responded, genuinely confused about the nature of the problem Harrison had identified. Harrison's response would become legendary within the military community, not for its wisdom or appropriateness, but for the assumptions it revealed about military tradition and who deserved respect. "That gesture you just exchanged," Harrison said, referring to the fist bump between Sarah and Rodriguez, "is reserved for SEALs. It's a sacred tradition that represents shared experiences and mutual respect earned through specific sacrifices. It's not appropriate for personnel who haven't earned that recognition through traditional pathways." The dining facility fell silent as other officers processed the implications of Harrison's statement. A 4-star general was publicly challenging a service member's right to participate in customs associated with her own military specialty, despite clear evidence of her qualifications and achievements. Rodriguez immediately understood the insult implicit in Harrison's statement, but military protocol prevented him from responding directly to such a senior officer. Sarah also recognized the challenge to her legitimacy, but she remained calm while considering her response options. Chun, observing the confrontation from a nearby table, moved closer to provide support for his team member while trying to defuse a situation that was rapidly becoming inappropriate for all concerned. "Sir," Chun interjected, "I think there might be some confusion about Petty Officer Mitchell's qualifications and status within the SEAL community." But Harrison's response revealed the depth of his convictions about military tradition and his belief that some customs should remain unchanged regardless of evolving circumstances. "Commander, I understand she completed training," Harrison said, his voice carrying throughout the dining facility, "but some traditions represent more than just technical achievements. They represent belonging to a brotherhood that have been earned through specific shared experiences. That gesture isn't appropriate for someone who doesn't truly understand what it represents." The accusation was clear and devastating. Despite Sarah's completion of SEAL training, her operational experience, and her acceptance within the SEAL community, a 4-star general was publicly questioning her right to participate in the customs and traditions associated with her own military specialty. Other officers in the dining facility watched the confrontation with a mixture of embarrassment and fascination. Some understood that Harrison was making a serious error in both judgment and military protocol. Others were curious to see how Sarah would respond to such a direct challenge to her legitimacy. Sarah considered her response options carefully. She could respond with anger at the insult implicit in Harrison's statement. She could appeal to military regulations that clearly supported her qualifications. She could simply accept the general's position and avoid further confrontation. Instead, Sarah chose a response that would demonstrate everything Harrison had misunderstood about earned respect and military tradition. Her reaction would prove more powerful than any argument or regulation, showing rather than telling the truth about who deserved honor within the military community. "Sir," Sarah said, her voice calm and professional despite the public nature of the confrontation, "I understand your concerns about military tradition and the importance of preserving customs that represent shared experiences and mutual respect." Harrison nodded, satisfied that Sarah was acknowledging the appropriateness of his intervention and the validity of his concerns about maintaining military traditions. But Sarah's next action would shatter every assumption Harrison held about military customs and force him to confront the reality of what she had achieved through her own sacrifices and dedication to military service. What happened next would become the stuff of military legend, a moment when earned respect collided with inherited assumptions in a way that left no room for misunderstanding or interpretation. The general who had been so certain about who deserved honor was about to discover that true military tradition was built on demonstrated competence rather than exclusive membership in historical brotherhoods. The confrontation had reached its climax, and Sarah Mitchell was about to provide a lesson about military tradition that would resonate throughout the Pentagon and beyond, challenging everyone present to reconsider their understanding of earned respect and the true meaning of military customs. The tension in the Pentagon dining facility was palpable as Sarah Mitchell stood before General Harrison, surrounded by dozens of senior military officers who were witnessing a confrontation that would reshape their understanding of military tradition and earned respect. The moment hung in the air like a challenge that demanded resolution, testing everything both participants believed about honor, qualification, and the true meaning of military customs. Sarah's response began with a gesture so subtle that Harrison almost missed its significance. Without breaking eye contact with the general, she reached into her dress uniform pocket and withdrew something that gleamed dully in the dining room's fluorescent lighting. It was her sealed trident, the same pin she wore on her chest, but this one showing the wear patterns and slight discoloration that came from years of operational use. The edges were worn smooth from handling, the metal darkened in places where it had been exposed to salt water and sand, and most tellingly, it bore a small dent near the eagle's wing where it had deflected a piece of shrapnel during a combat operation. "General," Sarah said, her voice carrying clearly throughout the silent dining facility, "you mentioned traditions that represent shared experiences and mutual respect earned through specific sacrifices. I'd like to show you something that might help clarify my qualifications to participate in those traditions." Harrison watched with growing unease as Sarah held the worn trident in her palm, suddenly recognizing that this was not the pristine pin of a recent graduate but the battle-worn insignia of an experienced operator. "This trident went with me through 18 months of combat operations," Sarah continued, her voice steady and professional despite the deeply personal nature of what she was revealing. "It was on my chest when I rappelled from helicopters into hostile territory. It was with me during underwater demolition missions that saved American lives. It absorbed blood from teammates I treated under fire, and it's been blessed by chaplains before operations where we weren't sure we'd come home." The dining facility remained absolutely silent as Sarah's words painted a picture of operational experience that went far beyond training achievements. Officers who had been watching with casual interest began to understand that they were witnessing something extraordinary. "This dent," Sarah said, pointing to the small imperfection on the trident's surface, "happened during a hostage rescue operation when enemy fire came close enough to remind me how fragile life really is. The discoloration here came from salt water during a submarine insertion that lasted 14 hours in conditions that tested every limit of human endurance." Harrison's confidence began wavering as he processed the implications of what Sarah was revealing. This was not a recent graduate who had completed training, but an experienced combat veteran whose operational record rivaled that of operators with decades of experience. But Sarah wasn't finished. Her next action would demonstrate the depth of her integration into SEAL culture in a way that no words could adequately express. Still maintaining eye contact with Harrison, Sarah extended her right hand toward Chief Rodriguez in what appeared to be a simple handshake. But as their hands met, Sarah executed a complex sequence of hand positions that served as a recognition code within the SEAL community. The sequence began with a standard handshake that transitioned into the fist bump Harrison had objected to, but then continued into a series of subtle finger positions and pressure variations that told a story readable only by those who had earned the right to understand its meaning. Rodriguez responded with his own sequence, and together they performed a ritual that was part greeting, part verification, and part celebration of shared experiences that could only be earned through operational service under the most demanding conditions. To the uninitiated observers in the dining facility, it looked like an elaborate handshake. But to those who understood its significance, it represented a conversation conducted in a language that could only be learned through years of service within the special operations community. The sequence concluded with a modified version of the traditional SEAL fist bump, but one that included specific variations that indicated Sarah's operational experience, her geographic areas of operation, and her role within various missions. Rodriguez's response confirmed his recognition of her qualifications and his acceptance of her as a full member of their brotherhood. General Harrison watched this exchange with growing comprehension of his error. The gesture he had objected to was not an inappropriate appropriation of military tradition, but a legitimate expression of mutual respect between qualified operators who had earned their status through identical pathways. But Sarah's demonstration was not yet complete. Her final action would provide the most powerful lesson about military tradition and earned respect that Harrison would ever receive. Without ceremony or dramatic announcement, Sarah removed the SEAL trident from her dress uniform and handed it to Harrison for his examination. "Sir," she said simply, "I invite you to examine this insignia and tell me whether the person who wore it through combat operations deserves to participate in the traditions of the community that awarded it." Harrison accepted the trident with hands that trembled slightly as he processed the weight of his mistake. As he examined the worn metal, he saw evidence of experiences that matched or exceeded those of any operator he had served with during his own career. The battle damage was authentic. The wear patterns were consistent with years of operational use. Most importantly, the inscriptions on the reverse side told a story of service that included dates, locations, and unit designations that Harrison recognized from classified operations he had personally approved. Operation Neptune's Thunder, 2019, Harrison read from one of the inscribed notations. Operation Silent Dawn, 2020. Maritime Interdiction, Persian Gulf, 2021. Each inscription represented missions that Harrison remembered authorizing, operations that had required the highest levels of skill and courage from the special operations personnel who executed them. The realization that Sarah had participated in operations he considered legendary within the special operations community fundamentally changed his understanding of her qualifications. But it was the final inscription that truly humbled the four-star general. For Marcus, from the team member who brought him home, Rodriguez stepped forward to explain the inscription's significance. "General, Petty Officer Mitchell carried me 3 miles through enemy territory after I was wounded during an extraction gone wrong. She saved my life and refused evacuation until every other team member was safely aboard the recovery aircraft." The weight of Harrison's error settled on him like a physical burden as he realized the magnitude of his misunderstanding. He had challenged the qualifications of a combat veteran whose service record exceeded that of most operators he had commanded. He had questioned the appropriateness of customs being practiced by someone who had earned them through sacrifices that surpassed those of many who wore the same insignia. Harrison looked up from the trident to meet Sarah's eyes, seeing in them not anger or vindication, but the quiet confidence that came from knowing one's worth was based on proven competence rather than others' recognition. "Petty Officer Mitchell," Harrison said, his voice carrying throughout the still-silent dining facility. "I owe you an apology that goes far beyond personal embarrassment. I made assumptions about your qualifications and your right to participate in military traditions that were not based on fact or your actual service record." The general paused, recognizing that his words were being heard by dozens of senior officers who would carry this lesson throughout their own commands and careers. "More importantly," Harrison continued, "I had demonstrated a fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of military tradition and earned respect. These customs exist not to exclude, but to recognize those who have proven themselves worthy through service and sacrifice. Your operational record speaks for itself, and your right to participate in SEAL traditions is unquestionable." Sarah accepted Harrison's apology with the same grace she had shown throughout the confrontation. "Sir, I understand that changing circumstances can challenge our assumptions about tradition and qualification. What's important is that we recognize earned respect when we see it, regardless of how it challenges our preconceptions." Harrison returned the trident to Sarah, noting how naturally it settled in her palm, and recognizing the unconscious respect with which she handled the symbol of her achievements. "Petty Officer Mitchell," Harrison said, "would you honor me by demonstrating the proper SEAL recognition gesture? I believe I have some learning to do about traditions I thought I understood." Sarah's response was immediate and natural. She extended her hand to Harrison in the sequence she had shared with Rodriguez, modifying it appropriately to acknowledge Harrison's rank while maintaining the essential elements that marked it as recognition between warriors who understood the cost of their profession. Harrison participated as best he could, recognizing that he was receiving an education in military tradition from someone whose qualifications exceeded his own understanding. The gesture concluded with a fist bump that carried the weight of mutual respect between professionals who had both sacrificed for their country's service. As the dining facility began returning to normal conversation, officers throughout the room processed what they had witnessed. The confrontation had begun with a general challenging a service member's right to participate in military traditions. It had ended with that same general receiving education about the true meaning of earned respect and the proper understanding of military customs. Word of the encounter spread rapidly throughout the Pentagon and beyond, carried by officers who recognized the importance of the lesson they had witnessed. The story became part of military lore, cited in leadership courses and professional development programs as an example of how assumptions about tradition and qualification could be challenged by demonstrated competence. For Sarah Mitchell, the confrontation represented both vindication and responsibility. She had proven her qualifications beyond any reasonable question, but she also understood that her success carried obligations to those who would follow. Every action she took would be scrutinized as evidence for or against expanding opportunities for women in military service. General Harrison's public acknowledgement of his error became a turning point in military attitudes toward integration and tradition. His willingness to admit his mistake and learn from someone he had initially dismissed demonstrated the kind of intellectual honesty that effective leadership required. In the months that followed, Harrison became an advocate for evaluating military personnel based on demonstrated competence rather than assumptions about background or qualification. He frequently cited his encounter with Sarah as evidence that military tradition was best preserved by maintaining high standards rather than restricting opportunities based on historical precedent. Sarah's operational career continued with increasingly complex assignments that tested her capabilities as both an individual operator and a team leader. Her reputation within the special operations community was built not on her status as the first woman SEAL, but on her consistent performance under the most demanding circumstances. The gesture that had sparked the confrontation with Harrison became a symbol of something larger than individual achievement. It represented the evolution of military tradition to include all those who earned their place through sacrifice and competence, regardless of how their presence might challenge historical assumptions. Years later, when Sarah was promoted to senior leadership positions within the special operations community, she would often share the story of her encounter with General Harrison as a lesson about the difference between preserving tradition and preserving exclusivity. Military traditions exist to honor those who have earned respect through service and sacrifice, she would tell junior officers. When we confuse tradition with exclusion, we dishonor the very values those traditions were meant to preserve. The dining facility at the Pentagon where the confrontation occurred eventually displayed a plaque commemorating the encounter, though it focused not on the conflict but on the resolution. The inscription read simply, "Honor is earned through service, not inherited through assumption." General Harrison, reflecting on the encounter in his retirement, would often cite it as the most important lesson of his military career. He had learned that true leadership required the humility to recognize when assumptions were wrong and the courage to acknowledge earned respect wherever it was found. Sarah Mitchell's legacy extended far beyond her individual achievements to encompass the lessons her career provided about merit, tradition, and the evolving nature of military service. She had proven that belonging was not about fitting into existing structures, but about meeting the standards those structures were designed to preserve. The gesture that had caused such controversy became a symbol of inclusion based on qualification rather than background. It represented the evolution of military culture to embrace all those who earned their place through demonstrated competence and unwavering commitment to the mission and their teammates. In the end, the confrontation between Sarah Mitchell and General Harrison became a testament to the military's capacity for growth and the power of earned respect to overcome inherited prejudice. It proved that true military tradition was built not on exclusivity, but on the unwavering standard that honor must be earned through service, sacrifice, and the willingness to pay whatever price the mission demanded.